Okay, I think we're going to get started here. So, first of all, thank you all for the tremendous interest that has been shown in this event. It's, as we were just discussing as we were coming online as a panel group, it's indicative of the level of urgency and interest in this topic around the California source reduction law going into effect and the deadlines that are approaching. So, without further ado, let me first introduce myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to be a little bit of the MC, but I'm going to hand off to several of our panelists here shortly. So, Russell, maybe we can flip ahead. So, first of all, myself, I'm Sebastian DiGrande. I'm the CEO here at PCX and proud to be hosting this. And again, thankful for all of you to join. Just a high level on the overall flow of the discussion for today. We really want this to be as interactive as possible, informative, yes, but also we want to start fielding your questions. So you'll see we've broken the session into two big blocks. The first, which will mostly be delivered by Russell Davis here in a moment, is to give a quick overview of source reduction, the source reduction law, some of the implications. Many of you will have attended the CAA webinars, which hopefully were quite informative, and we hope to connect the dots there. We'll pause briefly for a few questions. Feel free to post those questions along the way in the Q&A section of the Zoom link here, and we'll pull some of those questions at that point. The second half is really meant to kind of take us into the world of pragmatism. How do you take action? What are some of the opportunities for you to address the source reduction law in the regulation, in your practices, in your strategy? And we're excited to have a couple of other panelists who I'll introduce in a moment on that. And again, we'll do some Q&A at the end of that session and hopefully have enough time to field several of your questions. We'll be collating the questions at the end. I will also mention that we are recording this session. So for those of you attending and even those who couldn't attend, we'll share the link to the recording, and then we'll provide access to any of us as panelists for follow-up should you be interested in doing that. So let's go ahead. Let me do quick introductions on the panel. So we're really proud and appreciative to have several panelists here with us. I'll start with Wes Carter, who's the third-generation leader of Atlantic Packaging, which is the largest privately owned industrial packaging company in North America. Wes is also the founder of A New Earth Project, which integrates wellness, sustainability, and conservation initiatives to highlight the interconnected health of people and the planet. And Wes, as I've gotten to know, is an avid outdoorsman, and he serves on the board of Conservation Alliance, Wild Aid, and several other organizations working towards a resilient future for generations to come. And as you'll see, tremendously positive, high-energy leader, and we're really excited and grateful to have him here. John Willard is a principal with BCG's Qantas team. He has over 15 years of experience leading corporate sustainability initiatives. He's an expert in helping CPG companies in particular implement sustainability targets and embed them into their core business strategies. And he has deep expertise in sustainability data systems, policy integration, impact modeling, and reporting frameworks. John's supported by Tim Mohin, who's joining us as well here. He's a partner and director at BCG. He's a globally recognized sustainability and ESG exec, and he was the former CEO at GRI. He has over 20 years experience developing strategies and embedding sustainability into business operations with Fortune 500 companies around the world. And then finally, Russell Davis, who's PCX's head of products and services. He has over 10 years of experience leading circular economy product initiatives. He's an expert in helping companies implement sustainability strategies and translate them into ongoing operational programs. And he leads our overall service offering here at BCG at PCX, and we'll be doing a lot of the talking, particularly early on in this session. And then I'll just do one quick infomercial on PCX for those of you who are not familiar with who we are as the hosts here. We are a plastic responsibility platform. We are working with over 200 companies around the world, and we kind of describe ourselves as having three pillars, and we'll talk a little bit about some of this later on. but we have three pillars to our offering. At the top, our responsibility intelligence offering includes advisory services, but also a scalable SaaS platform for EPR compliance services. And we have a lot of policy expertise around the company. And then we have two impact pillars, one around circular plastics, which is really access to traceable recycled material, where we have project partners in 14 countries around the world, and a recovery marketplace where we help companies take action on diverting plastic waste from nature globally as well. So with that in mind, with all of that said, let me hand off to Russell, who will get into the content here regarding SB54 source reduction.
All right. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Appreciate that kind introduction. So let's talk a little bit about SB54. What is it? Why is it? And what does it mean for you? So it's a big shift in packaging regulation. If you've been following any of the CAA webinars, Emily Coven, the director there, has talked a lot about how this is going to be the most impactful and largest program globally once it's fully in play. It affects all the producers of packaging and single-use plastic in California, and that's single-use packaging overall, not just plastic. Producers are defined a couple of different ways. You could be the brand owner, you could be the manufacturer, you could be the importer. CAA has provided some very clear guidance on who is defined as a producer. When did it happen? It's been around for a little while. It was passed back in 2022, but its implementation has really been scaling up now, and the goals within the program are ranging from 2024 up until 2032. We'll talk a lot about that 2032 target over the course of today. It applies to all the packaging in California, so it is limited to California. It's a California law. And why is it in place? Its ultimate goal is to cut plastic waste, boost recycling, and shift financial responsibility from consumers to producers. In practice, this will mean fundraising via CAA to invest in infrastructure to improve all of SB54's goals. The impact on you collectively through CAA by 2032, CAA with all of its members must reduce plastic weight by 25% by 2032. At least 10% of that needs to come from RRE initiatives. That means reuse, refill, or elimination. Elimination has a very specific definition, that meaning a component could be eliminated but not replaced with something else. It must go away entirely. And up to 8 percentage points of those 25 percentage points can come from PCR, including more recycled content in your products and services. Less talked about, but equally important and impactful, is a requirement to reduce plastic components by 25% as well. So not only must the weight be reduced by 25%, but the number of individual plastic components must be reported on and reduced by 25% by 2032. There's a couple of recyclability and recycling goals in the law as well. These are quite impactful overall for CAA and its members. At least 65% of single-use plastic and packaging must be recycled by 2032. CAA has many initiatives. If you've joined any of their webinars around this, there's multiple work streams they have going to meet this target. And also 100% of packaging must be recyclable or compostable by 2032. There's a couple of exceptions, but not many. It's a very ambitious target, and there's a lot of work to do both on the producer side of modifying your packaging and on the CAA side on helping to invest in infrastructure to ensure that new formats are considered recyclable by 2032. Additional impacts are funding, recycling and cleanup systems through CAA, and annual reporting, both from producers to CAA and from CAA to the state. The key requirements for brand owners and producers are over on the right. The first one is meeting packaging recyclability and reuse targets. And that when you roll all the producers together, that helps CAA achieve the goal. The second one is achieving 25% plastic source reduction by 2032. That is the core of what we're going to talk about today. And additionally, there is funding recycling and waste management through PRO fees, through CAA, and additional reporting and compliance verification. There's new types of reporting and verification with SB54 that aren't present in other laws within the US or globally. So there's some change that will happen for producers. Next, we're going to talk about what is source reduction? What does it mean? How hard might it be to get to the targets? So the key thing to understand is that your 2023 baseline is set in stone and it will affect how much reduction you need to do by 2032. Looking at the chart here, the big green area is your allowable or CAA's collective allowable declining cap from 2023. There's reduction targets, milestones along the way. These are outlined in SB54, part of the legislation, reducing by 10% and then 20 and then 25%. And as we talked about before, there's some RRE minimums that are tied to those milestones as well. You see your 2023 baseline in the black line, but going down from that is a 25% absolute source reduction from the baseline. So this is a challenging target, but additionally, a new challenge on top of this is there's not an allowance for growth. So the blue section is your BAU plastic growth. So as a business, if you're growing 3%, 4%, a typical kind of economic growth factor, you might end up with 40 to 50% actual source reduction from where you would have been in 2032 if you don't make any changes. Some brands grow less, some brands are, growing 25, 50% every year, and the challenge is even greater for those. So next, let's talk a little bit about the CAA source reduction briefings. They've announced many new things. There were 2 recent public webinars about source reduction. Last week, there was one on eco-modulation and fees and how source reduction fits into that. A week before that, there was one all about source reduction. What is the program? What are the levers? How does it work? And they've announced a few things that we're going to unpack here a little bit. The first one is caps with malice. So there will be a limit on the amount of plastic production, and there will be penalties if individual producers aren't meeting these caps as well. This quote here is taken right from one of the CAA slides. The malice fees must meaningfully increase the cost of exceeding the targets. We don't know exactly what this is going to mean, but it implies that it will be expensive for producers who won't be able to meet the targets. And of course, ongoing developments here, the exact levels of malice, the cap rates, how that affects your individual source reduction plan, that hasn't been announced yet, but we expect CAA to be providing more information on how this is going to work sooner than later. The next one is individual source reduction plans. They still net out to 25% overall. CAA still needs to meet this 25% target. There were some questions in the Q&A and CAA's webinars about individual companies and what their source reduction plan is going to be. And our take is that it's likely going to be near 25%. They haven't released the methodology for this yet, so we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. But for CAA to collectively reach 25%, if some producers are lower reduction targets, some other producers are going to have to be higher. Next is the no adjustment for growth. We talked about this on the previous slide. The sales growth, unit growth must be net non-plastic and additional to the source reduction requirements. There's alternative compliance with PCR up to 8%. This was an interesting announcement from CAA and also outlined in the legislation. It's likely that some of the easiest reductions to meet are going to be through incorporating more PCR. Many packaging types, especially plastic packaging types, can use PCR, are already using PCR. This is likely to be something that we expect producers to pursue. And one of the ongoing developments here, certifications are required for this PCR. The legislation announces that the APR post-consumer certification is okay, but CAA has also said that they're working on methodology and other ways to meet compliance. We're not sure if that means additional certifications or something else. We expect them to announce more about this in the coming months. The prior reduction credit is going to be absolute reduction. If you've read the law, there is an a requirement in there for CAA to provide credit or recognition in some way for efforts that producers have done over the past 10 years. CAA has announced that there's not a growth factor or anything like that introduced into this. And so even if a producer has made significant reductions to their amount of plastic over the past 10 years, sales growth has likely eroded those. And so it's likely most producers won't get much credit from this, but of course the actual calculation methodology and how this will be counted has yet to be announced. So we expect more developments from CAA on this as well. Next is shipping to non-recyclable formats doesn't count. So if you have a recyclable format and in order to reduce the amount of plastic, you're hoping to shift it to, say, a flexible format that's considered non-recyclable, those source reductions aren't going to count under SB54. It's one of the most pursued legacy lightweighting strategies that many producers have used. But in order for source reduction to count, it has to stay or shift to a recyclable format. The definitions on which of these formats, especially flex ones, are going to be deemed recyclable over time, and by what dates is still up in the air. We don't know how that's going to play out quite yet. There's complex reporting. There's new reporting for California that's required under this law. CAA is requiring. You will need to have credible reporting for the 5 major reduction pathways that CAA outlined in their webinars. We have more on those pathways later in here, but the takeaway is that it's something new you will need to do. There's templates, methodologies, any audit requirements. All of those are to be announced and to be developed and released by CAA over time. And finally, trading. This is really interesting. Something CAA talked about is there's an opportunity for producers to recoup investments if their source reduction comes in below target. We don't know exactly how this is going to work yet, the timing and methodology for this, but the implication here is if a producer can make major reductions in their plastic, there may be a way to sell these additional reduction credits or allowances, however they're going to be deemed and named, back to the market to be sold to other companies who maybe weren't able to meet those reduction targets. So a lot of new things coming from CAA under SB54 and a number of ongoing developments to understand exactly how they're going to play out. But the impact simply from these announcements is going to be significant for companies, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here. Timeline. The clock's already ticking on source reduction. These are some key upcoming dates that are happening, not all the way out to 2032, but over the next 18 months, what can we expect? This week, there is a submission deadline for 2023 supply. Back to your baseline we talked about. This is some information CAA has requested to get baselines for producers and to help inform the design of the overall plan and malice schedule and things like this. We expect individual source reduction plans to be due early in 2026. The CAA said there's going to be more clarifications coming on exactly what those are and how they need to be detailed and submitted. Towards the end of Q2 in 2026, producers will have to submit their 2025 supply. So the takeaway from this is you need to have programs ongoing early in 2026 to be able to report that 2025 supply. You need to be able to calculate it. In June 26, CAA submits their program plan, which goes into effect in January of 2027. We expect the regulator to have some responses and tweaks to this. And of course, many things will become clear when CAA announces what the program plan looks like. And then finally, the initial target outlined in SB54, the 10% reduction and the 2% RRE target are supposed to be completed by 2027, which means this comes from your 2026 supply. Your reported 26 supply would have to reflect these targets. We're not sure how CAA is going to interpret this or impose it on producers, but it is one of the first outlined dates in the legislation. So let's talk a little bit about the business case for source reduction. Reducing packaging to avoid high CAA malice fees. Proactive action is probably going to make financial sense for every producer. And it sounds like the companies that delay their source reduction efforts are going to have to pay more overall. The first big lever here is the cap malice. It is unique for California and for this program. It's probably going to be the biggest financial impact, and we expect it to be a recurring impact along with CAA's other reporting. I don't think they've announced any specifics on this yet, but we're all going to be listening to see what's announced. A couple of things that CAA has told us is the malice fees will meaningfully increase the cost of exceeding targets and would lead to the biggest financial impact of missed. Our interpretation is that this is going to be a big deal for producers. The next one is base fees. CAA base fees. This is similar to other states and frankly other countries. Growing plastic footprint has a compounding effect. You'll be paying based on the fee schedules which CAA will announce. The next one is RRE malice. This was a new one that was announced by CAA. It is implies penalties for not meeting the targets or quotas on how much of the reduction needs to come from RRE. We need more information to understand exactly what this means, but it sounds like there will be some sort of target or penalty if producers miss this. Trading. We talked a bit about this a little bit earlier. At PCX, we think this is one of the biggest opportunities for producers. It could have a triple compounding effect. So if a producer is reducing below the source reduction targets, not only are they not paying fees on that, they're avoiding any of the malice fees, the caps or the RRE, and they could be generating tradable credits, which could be sold back to the marketplace. Of course, more information is needed, but a very interesting development announced by CAA. And finally, bonuses. Hitting to be announced eco-modulation targets tied to SB54 and source reduction goals would have some sort of bonus. We're looking forward to hearing exactly what these are. The important thing here is one it's potentially going to be expensive. Some of this is avoidable, which is very exciting, but it's unique to California source reduction. It's a new model for implementing an EPR law. And with that, that concludes our overall overview of SB54. Sebastian, do you want to do a little bit of Q&A and see what questions have been coming in?
Yeah, and we'll take a few questions now, so feel free to post them on the Q&A link at the bottom of the Zoom. Already a couple flowing in. We'll do a few here and then save some others for the end. There's one that came through that's a very specific, almost tactical question, which is, given that the 8% reduction can be claimed from PCR, that means the actual individual target for individual producers is likely near 17, not 25%. Is that right,
I
Russell?
think so. CA was asked this question and they answered it on their webinar, and that is exactly how the answer sounded. I'd
Mhm.
expect a more formal clarification to come from them on this, but this is exactly how it appears.
Yeah. You started to answer this one, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. The question about malice fees, whether that would be standalone or in comparison to base fees, is there any sense of how much that will be?
No, not yet. CAA talked a little bit about charging malice fees on the margin. So I think that implies that if you were supposed to reduce by 20% in a certain year and you only got to 18%, like the fees would be on that little bit of overage. But I don't think there's been any announcement yet on our malice fees, the same as base fees or more than base fees or less than base fees. We're awaiting clarification.
Okay. And then on the topic of prior reduction, you mentioned, can you just go one step deeper on how prior reduction efforts would be counted or not in prior years in the decade or so that might have preceded?
I wish I could say more, but we haven't received any sort of announcement on exactly how this will be counted from CAA, other than they had previously announced there's no allowance for growth in there. So it has to be a net reduction in pounds of plastic from 2013 to 2022 to get credit. You would have to have less plastic in 2022 in California than you had in 2013 in California. But the specifics to be announced.
Okay, I'm going to do one or two more here. It's one question here. You haven't mentioned the producer reporting 30 days after the regulations are final. Do you have insight on this reporting?
I don't have that at the moment. We'll have to follow up on that one with a more specific answer.
Okay. And then one more, and then we'll go and save the rest for the next round here. Can you confirm that for the supply report due in 2027 on 26 data, that it needs to show that we've reduced our 26 supply versus 25 by the target for 27? Or is this just the plan to work towards the 27 target?
I believe the reduction target outlined in SB54, the 10% that CAA has to collectively achieve by 2027, is on the 2023 producer baseline. So exactly how that'll play out for a producer with their individual source reduction plan is to be determined, but I believe that's going to be a 10% reduction that has to be achieved from the 2023 production baseline.
But just to clarify, it's not off of the 25 baseline, it's off of your 23 reported baseline, and it needs to be achieved the 10% by 2026 to be reported in 27. Is that correct?
Yeah, achieved during 26.
During
So like
26.
your
Yeah.
production through 26 would have to be 10% less than your.
Okay.
Of course, this will all be through individual producer source reduction plans. So specific targets would be outlined in there. This is the overall CAA target, which we expect will filter through relatively directly to producers simply because the overall targets are so aggressive.
Great. Okay, let's take a pause on the Q&A there because I want to make sure we preserve time both for the other content and then get into some more operational and action-oriented Q&A and preserve the time for that. So let me hand off to John at this point. John, maybe you can pick it up in talking about development of an overall source reduction plan.
Thanks, Sebastian. So we won't start with just these are very complicated requirements, and they really do start to need a concentrated activation plan to build a viable source reduction plan that turn these complex goals into measurable business progress. And it starts with really building that foundation with data. And different companies are in different phases of this overall workflow. We're finding that there are ultimately challenges across each one of these, but it really does start with the data. And that's about building a clear baseline that allows you to track progress, meet requirements. And that data should have, I like to think of it as like a 3A component. It has to be in the position where it can be audited. It has to be automatable, meaning to help streamline on an annual basis. And there needs to be some accountability across the broader teams to be able to pull that information on a reoccurring basis and really own that. So it needs to be able to capture the weight of plastic, the different materials and formats, the number of components by year, by state, so that you have this all organized and structured in a way that will help you understand from a regulatory position what is in scope and what reduction pathways are viable. That moves in then to the target setting. And this is about translating these obligations into measurable commitments that businesses can make. It starts with a definition around what needs to be from a reduction perspective, from a source reduction, what needs to be transferred over to a reuse and refill target, and ultimately moving into like what are those recycled content or PCR related goals in order to meet the overall reduction, the source reduction targets. These need to be adaptable, recognizing that California is one of many states, but likely to be one of the most ambitious and challenging objectives and targets to meet. So really prioritizing across the different landscape of all the different targets that need to be met. What is the baseline and common denominator for you to align the overall business strategy to? Lastly, we recommend that starting with a company level target on source reduction, defining clear KPIs, and then cascading those down to business units, brands, all the way down to the SKU level to help identify what is going to be the accountability and the progress that will be measured over time. Next, we move into the strategy development phase, which is about deciding where and how to act to make progress tangible and overall create a timeline and plan for when these actions will be met and at what cost. And I think that's a really important point to identify here is that initially looking at the entire portfolio of packaging or single-use plastic as being assigned what can be the optimal reduction pathway. Is it a candidate for refill and reuse applications? Can components be eliminated altogether to help reduce? Is there lightweighting, right sizing? Is this an opportunity for applying the alternative compliance or that PCR integration? And then ultimately, where can we shift materials into the non-plastic covered materials? And then from there, as information is released, you'll be able to really build the business case for transformation. And that is understanding what are the EPR, what is the potential of inaction for not reducing, and comparing that to where do we have quick wins where we can make quick early changes and meet those interim milestones, and where do we need to start thinking about that longer term system level change for transformation and prioritizing a roadmap from there. Then as part of this, it's really seen that because these are challenging goals to achieve, some form of collaboration, whether that's between manufacturers, brands, retailers, industry collaborations, need to be established to help overcome some of the challenges of collective action and some of the real logistical and transformational challenges that are involved with some of these goals, like refill and reuse components of the reduction targets. Then we move into the operationalize and communicate. And this is about actually executing by engaging the right teams across the organization. This is going to include, packaging design engineering. This is going to be working with sourcing and procurement and with direct operations of how this all comes together. Again, being able to track performance through consistent data updates, reporting, and sharing out progress to both from an internal perspective to understand the engagement and the progress to date, but also with your customers and your consumers, how you're actually working towards those goals. So it's a large data-driven solution to help meet those reduction goals. But these efforts are going to require that based on all of the different things that Russell laid out with the source reduction goals and the incentivization to do so. If we go into the next slide, we could talk a little bit about what are the identified pathways to achieve these source reduction goals. And these really do scale from the quick wins that are out there, which we can think of as the elimination or removing unnecessary packaging and components. Oftentimes the benefits here are that they could be potentially cost neutral, or there could be some relative savings. They can be quick to execute, meaning you can go to your packaging and make those, do a diagnostic and scan and understand what opportunities are viable to act immediately. But however, they're likely limited in scope. There's only so much you can take out from that. And there are maybe some drawbacks to shelf presence or product protection that will need to be evaluated further. Lightweighting, this has been, we've seen a lot of this in recent years. And as Russell mentioned, one of the real challenges here is going from a rigid to a flexible, that is going from a recyclable to a non-recyclable won't count. So there's going to need to be some thinking about wall thinning or squaring to help with palletization. These can often result in cost savings. And in fact, there's probably likely opportunities through less material and improved efficiencies that can result in that. And they have a shorter timeline for implementation. But again, limited in overall reduction potential merely by the same of you can only reduce headspace so much, you can only thin the walls by so much. Different packaging formats will be able to pursue weighting in different ways. But then we have the alternative compliance. And overall, this is about increasing the recycled content to offset some of the virgin plastic usage. And this should really be a part of that 25% component. I think the question earlier was a really good one, is like from a reduction perspective, in a weight to weight conversion, yes, this 8% can help count towards that reduction potential, but it's capped at 8%, so it's not going to get you all the way there. And it requires the supply chain to really establish that reliable supply for stable cost and making sure that the incremental cost is manageable for the years to come. And we expect that will be a really interesting area to think about in terms of what is the PCR supply out there and how is that going to change under these requirements. Next, we have the shift to non-plastic material. And here we have a multitude of innovation and opportunities. And I know Wes will really dive into some of the things that can be enabled here. But this is there stands to be a pretty substantial impact from weight and a component perspective. You can move completely out of plastic into non-plastic materials. However, some of the solutions out there do have higher material costs. This takes a little bit longer to implement because it's a packaging redesign. And so factoring that into your overall timeline. And then reuse refill. This is where real system level change needs to be part of the conversation. And it's going to take longer to enable reuse refill applications from a packaging design perspective, because you have to create those partnerships, understand the various business models that are enabled by it, and then pilot and launch and scale them all together. So while that is definitely a need, it is working on that now such that the effects of that can be turned into reality, and the impact on your overall targets can be felt in the coming years. Is understanding time constraint is a really important aspect of building out these reuse and refill models. So with that, I'll hand it over to Wes to talk a little bit about some of the packaging innovation.
All right. Thanks, John. Sebastian, are you guys can y'all hear me, see me?
Yep, you're all good. You're all good.
Okay, great. Yeah, of course. Thank you for the kind introduction. At Atlantic Packaging, we have been approaching these packaging challenges in three different ways. As John mentioned, reduction is obviously always number one. Anytime we can right-size packaging, optimize packaging for the application, there's an opportunity to source reduce, but in many cases to save money as well. And with this new law, these reductions can be a way to offset some of the fee structures. We've had a lot of success in tertiary packaging, specifically in these reductions. The tertiary packaging source reduction opportunities tend to be a little less disruptive than retail applications, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Designing for recycling over the last 4 or 5 years, the packaging supply chain, there's been more innovation in new materials designed specifically for recycling than probably at any time in the history of our industry. And a lot of these new formats, these new materials are fiber-based for the very reason that fiber is already really well scaled in this country, and we already have great circularity and demand for that material to go back into recycled content. So one of the things that we're doing at Atlantic is continuing to invest in these new innovations. And then finally, John mentioned collaboration. The recycling piece to me is another area where it does require a lot of collaboration, where even businesses working together to create closed loops and investing in recycling infrastructure that may not be part of a municipal recycling system. We can create those closed loops between companies that tend to give us cleaner waste streams when we're focusing on individual products. The benefits of fiber, as I mentioned before, fiber is already really well scaled, not just in the United States, but around the world. And anytime we can move from plastic to fiber, the fee structures with a law like SB54 are going to be significantly less. All of the major paper producers all over the world are really focused on bringing the next generation of paper substrates to market to work in a lot of these applications. There's also tremendous investment in nature-based coatings to help with a lot of these traditionally poly-coated applications as well. But as you can see, all of these innovations are ones that Atlantic has worked on over the last several years for a lot of major brands. And each one of these applications, these were traditionally in plastic packaging. You can see some protective packaging applications up there using things like honeycomb, die-cut corrugated, and in really creative ways to display your products really well. The other thing is in all of these applications, we're also constantly focused on right sizing as well. So as you're making this shift to fiber-based solutions, another way we can offset a lot of fees is through right sizing, which can save in a variety of ways, including freight. We're also really focused on these retail applications, and as I mentioned before, the retail applications tend to be more challenging. But some of the areas that fiber is having some breakthrough is in things like overwrap that were traditionally in biaxially oriented polypropylene or printed shrink film. High-end printed papers for those applications where you don't need a lot of barrier properties. Those technologies are available today. Curbside recyclable fiber solutions to replace shrink bundling film are bringing to market. And then one of the latest innovations that Atlantic's brought to market is a product called Paperform. You can see here in the right corner to replace your traditional blister packs. So these are just examples of all innovations that have been developed in the last 3 or 4 years, all being driven by fiber as a more circular material that can be scaled effectively. And again, the fee structures between fiber and single-use plastic that traditionally dominate a lot of these applications is really significant. And we think in most cases, there is a way to get to cost neutrality, when you acknowledge the EPR fees in this process. As I mentioned earlier, where we see source reduction, we talk a lot about low-hanging fruit. Tertiary packaging, things like stretch film, shrink bundling film. Atlantic supports major consumer products companies in virtually every industry vertical. And if there's one thing they all have in common is they all ship products on pallets, and stretch film is the primary shipping device, packaging shipping device for those materials. There's a lot of opportunities to source reduce in stretch film just because of the nature of the material, because it does stretch so much. So if you're a brand who hasn't gone through a corporate-wide stretch film optimization program, that can be a way to typically save as much as 20 to 40% in plastic just by optimizing your network of equipment and putting in thinner gauge materials. Atlantic has also developed some unique monitoring devices to eliminate a lot of variability in an inherently variable product. And then we're also creating closed loops by collecting used stretch film and recycling that, and then putting the PCR back into stretch film. So as was mentioned earlier, PCR is a good way to source reduce, but obviously we want to be reducing virgin plastic. Oftentimes you'll see PCR products on the marketplace that are a lot heavier gauge because they need that heavier gauge to overcome the performance degradation. But when we can create closed loops specifically with just products like stretch film, we can create higher quality PCR, and that's what we're able to do. So if we can put PCR into performance products that are already thinner gauge, you can get a double whammy where you're getting source reduction and PCR both. And that's a program that Atlantic has developed that we're delivering to a lot of our customers. But regardless of whether it's with Atlantic or someone else, optimizing stretch film is really low-hanging fruit. Again, shrink bundling film is another area. A lot of companies in the food and beverage space use a lot of shrink bundling film. Many of those products can be down gauged significantly and are also great places to consider PCR. There are other products in palletization, from corner boards to slip sheets. All of these areas are source reduction opportunities that, again, are less disruptive than a lot of the retail applications. So certainly a good place to focus on initially, and begin to get some of these savings implemented.
Great. Thanks, Wes. This is super helpful. So as you can all see, we're trying to get to some practical advice here now, both in terms of how to develop a thoughtful source reduction strategy and actual execution around levers that can be pulled for source reduction. The third piece of practical work is then actually the compliance work itself, and how you do that work reliably and cost effectively. And I'm going to hand it back to Russell to get into that last topic before we head into the Q&A.
Thanks, Sebastian. Important thing here is integrating your source reduction into a scalable compliance plan. As we've learned, California is novel and new, and there's new types of challenges and new types of reporting. So you need to have a higher level of organization and, I guess, commitment within your organization to meet the goals. The first one is you have to be able to have operational execution to make it happen. Combining that with your packaging strategy, which John was talking about, and then actually making the reductions, which Wes was talking about some options for as well. With your operational execution, you need to have a scalable reporting and tracking system already in place. And if it's not already in place, you need to have it in the next, couple of months. There's multiple reporting deadlines from different states coming into play. And ideally, you would have this as something that can then extend across borders and EPR schemes. So it's not a piecemeal approach. You're able to manage everything in one place. With your packaging strategy, you need to figure out what redesign are you going to do? How are you going to fund it? Who are your partners? What's your channel strategy? How are you going to govern this? Do you need a PMO pushing it forward? And then managing that long-term with governance and decision-making. And then with the reductions, Wes did a really great job of covering this, but there's a combination of quick wins. These probably consist of PCR, elimination, and off-the-shelf swap formats, but you also need your long-term foundation for long-term shifts. One way to think about this would be to pilot some changes in your California division and then scale it out to other jurisdictions as it makes sense. Some of the challenges we've seen with larger companies are a series of one-off projects and a somewhat piecemeal approach. Companies tend to, you learn about EPR, you start to consolidate the data, you start to submit it, but then regulations are ever evolving and changing. So you missed something, you have to go back. One example here is even between different CAA jurisdictions, you might have the same packaging, but different reporting. And this is a program that needs to be managed over time. There's significant headaches for companies trying to manage this series of one-off projects. You need to have that in-house EPR knowledge, but often it's someone who's redirected from a packaging engineering role or a compliance role that isn't specific to the nuances of the regulation. Fragmented data is always an issue with ad hoc requests and spreadsheets, and it requires ongoing continuity. So it's something that has to be managed over time. So overall, this can turn into a compounding risk, cost, and complexity. So from the program plan on the previous page, it's something that you need to get your arms around, even for simple compliance and making sure your data is correct. This is one specific example looking at the same packaging categories in two different states, California and Oregon. They might be called different things. So if you're pulling together an RFI from your supply chain, combining it with your sales data and an extract from your ERP system, those things might not match. You can see in the red many different, it's the smallest difference here is just what it's called. And being able to align that between states is one of the tactical challenges, at least that we've seen and that folks we've been talking to. This is a product offering from PCX. It's our responsibility intelligence platform, and it is an integrated service delivery that lowers costs, risks, complexity. It consists of EPR policy intelligence, so knowing what to do, not just in California, but in other countries around the world. We've got coverage in Europe, Asia, North America, and a team of experienced global EPR analysts. So when you're doing that RFI with your supply chain and trying to figure out how the data maps and where the gap is and how to plug the hole or how to allocate your sales across, a CAA example would be between Oregon and California. If you don't have the specific data for that, there's methodologies to do allocation based on various economic and population factors, that type of service. And then of course, this scalable packaging EPR platform, which includes your single source of truth. It's always available. Multiple users can be in it, SKU level reporting, and it helps with managerial reporting in addition to compliance. So something John was talking about earlier is having your data in place so you can know where the low-hanging fruit is, which SKUs you should be targeting, whether it's your division A versus division B that's really driving your compliance costs, and you want to allocate those costs to ensure that the right innovations are being invested in the right way. It's a type of view that a tool like this can provide for a lot of companies. If you're interested in learning more, you can either scan the code here or simply send us a note about that. And in closing, a few next steps to accelerate your compliance efforts: operationalizing your data, having your strategy, starting with some of those quick win pilots, PCR, lightweighting, etc. Planning those long-term packaging shifts that Wes was talking about, and organizing your program plan, making sure that someone is on top of this within your organization to drive the various complexities and reductions that are going to be required. And with that, I think we'll shift over to Q&A, and Sebastian, you can talk about some of the questions I've seen coming in.
We already have a few flowing in again, and feel free to add. We've got a few minutes left here. I'm going to start with the question that came in for Wes, which is, does the closed loop stretch film recycling have end markets in California or in the US in sufficient capacity?
The current pilot programs that we're running, we are collecting all the stretch film and processing it at Atlantic. We're actually creating the PCR in-house and then putting it back into high performance stretch film. So we are the end market for the material right now. That we're working to create a true closed loop, and we ultimately think for us this is a pilot and something that could potentially be scaled in California. We believe stretch film is one of the more readily available items for creating circularity because it is so recyclable and can go back into the same material.
Great. Thanks. John, question for you, and maybe Tim, is just the distinction between a source reduction strategy, as you were laying it out, and something that's just a typical overall packaging strategy.
Yeah, great question. I'll chime in here. I think this is really tied to the requirements of redesigning the portfolio, right? A packaging strategy has to incorporate all of these different elements of cost, of commercial, of packaging safety, of placement, of marketing. So tying that to a source reduction strategy is going to be looking at like an all of the above application of these different levers to be able to achieve that. And I think that's kind of the nuance here, is that we're introducing these requirements for helping drive reduction overall, while also still making sure that the products meet those minimum requirements for packaging. And I think this is the California context here is one of the most unique in the world. There is not another source reduction target and goal out there that is this aggressive and this challenging. So I think it does require sort of a new way of thinking about it and bringing in a holistic strategy to start to approach this.
And we all know that the most effective way to address pollution is not to pollute in the first place. And that's what source reduction is all about. It's about going upstream in the design phase, as John said, and actually reducing the amount of plastic that's put on the market. Now, all these market-based incentives that are coming in from California are supposedly going to get companies to do that. And as Wes ably explained, there's definitely some savings to be gained. I think what we need to look at is also what are the upsides? What can companies expect beyond avoidance of fees and malices that could actually motivate them and add value to their businesses? But the overall thing is that we're trying to design things so that plastic is not put on the market in the first place, rather than cleaning it up after it's on the market.
Thanks, Tim. Just spreading the wealth here, Russell, you mentioned the PCX Responsibility Intelligence platform. How is that different than an ERP solution that may already be in place?
Oh, yes. Good question. It's made for packaging compliance. ERP systems have been around for many years. They're typically custom integrated at a company, and they have a lot of important data in them that's good for your supply chain and managing your business. But when it comes to aggregating your plastic footprint with all the data that's needed, they never include everything that you need. And by the time you've tried to extract it, having a fit for purpose tool is leaps and bounds better than anything that you could partially get out of a ERP system. We've seen it with multiple companies.
Thanks, Russell. Wes, you wanted to chime in maybe on the prior question?
Yeah, I just wanted to dovetail something that Tim said, because in a lot of these retail applications in particular, many of our customers are beginning to look at these transition through the lens of brand as well. That packaging today truly is a brand attribute, and consumers, especially young consumers, are really evaluating brands ethically based on their packaging. And so, not just an avoidance of EPR fees, but also, really beginning to look at a fiber transition or an alternative material transition as really supportive of your brand image, I believe can be tremendously additive. And also, a lot of these transitions are a really great way to create marketing stories that you can appeal directly to your consumers. And a lot of our customers that have made these shifts create a lot of content in collaboration with us that then we put out on social media channels and things like that, just to really support the brand image that many of these organizations want for the emerging consumer who cares a lot about sustainability and health.
Great. Thanks, Wes. That may be the final word here. There are a couple other questions that we didn't get to. We're happy to connect after the fact. We thank everybody for attending and thank the panelists, Wes, John, Tim, Russell, for your contributions. A lot of work to be done here, but exciting times and really exciting to see how SB54 plays out and the kind of impact that can be delivered. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.